This is one of the photographs from Thomas Struth's famous museum series. As everybody knows probably by now, because these photographs have become so famous, he's made a large body of work having to do with galleries in some of the world's most famous museums, such as the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, the Louvre in Paris, and elsewhere. This is typical of the entire series in that the prints are quite large. These are large-scale photographs, and so they give a very vivid sense of the audience that is wandering through galleries, or in this case, sitting down and listening to instruction from a teacher. As you can see, these are school children. Some of them are wearing their uniforms, and others are wearing bits and pieces of it, but you can tell by the colors and so forth that they are there as a group. So this, of course, is a field trip. This is a class who has traveled together to one of the great museums of Spain. This, of course, is at the Prado Museum in Madrid. And we know that because of the presence of painting in the background hanging on the wall of this gallery, one of the great masterpieces by the greatest of all Spanish artists. I think one could say that. You may have to include Picasso in that list of two. But this is by the painter Diego Velásquez, who was the greatest Spanish artist of the 17th century. He has pictured himself, in fact, in the painting. He's inserted his own self-portrait here on the very far right-hand edge. Rather discreetly, he's separated himself from the main body of the Spanish onlookers at this scene and so forth, but nonetheless, there he is. Directly above the cartello down in the bottom right corner, where information typically is provided about a painting, about the artist, the date that it was made, and so forth. In any event, here we are at the Prado Museum sometime in 2005 with this group of school children who are listening to an in-house lecture or instruction about the painting on the wall that's being provided by their teacher. And you may not see her at first, but this is obviously the woman right here who's seated on the floor with the children, and she's talking about the painting. Looks like she's about to gesture at it. I think one of the things that's so remarkable about the photograph, the sort of the humanity of the photograph, is expressed by the way that these children are behaving very much as children will do. I'm going to say they're probably about ranging in age from 5 to 7, not quite sure, but about 6 years old, I would have thought. So let's say about first graders. And is typical of any group of first graders, some of them are going to be paying attention while others are completely distracted by other things that are going on elsewhere in the room. Some of the children gathered closest around her, are listening as she talks about the composition of this masterpiece. But others, of course, are like these two girls, are looking off at something else altogether. While here on the bench, one boy is demonstrating the roll and tumble technique for us that he would use on the soccer field. You can see that his feet are up in the air and so forth. But most of them seem to be looking at the painting, while one little boy right here, beautiful little face, looks directly out at us, much as the artist does in the painting. I can't imagine that this is accidental. I think this is the kind of detail that's very engaging, that brings the viewer into the narrative of the photograph, to which the photographer, to which Struth himself would have been acutely attentive and sensitive. It's one of the elements of this photograph that makes it, I think, so moving, because we're meant to participate in it in a way while being double viewers on different levels. We're looking at the children, of course, but then we're also our attention is also drawn to the painting in the background. Well, this is probably one of those occasions in a child's life when he or she first learns about his country's history. The Spanish school child of this age would be familiar with buildings and things in Madrid, probably the Natural History Museum, all the other great collections that are arrayed in the capital. But for all we know, this might be their first visit to a great art museum. The scene that is depicted in the painting, very large painting on the wall towards which they are looking, is of course one of the signature works by Velásquez. It was painted in 1635. It commemorates an event that happened 10 years earlier, however, the conclusion, the peace, or at least the surrender of the Dutch city of Breda, which is aflame in the background of the painting. All of the smoke going up is from the city of Breda, which has been captured by the Spanish army. One of the most important events in the long 80 years war of independence of the Netherlands from Spain that spanned the 16th well into the 17th century. Eventually, of course, the Dutch did win independence, at least for the northern provinces of what we call the Netherlands today. But at the time, this was one of the great Spanish victories in that protracted struggle. And therefore, it was appropriate as a subject that had been commissioned by the King of Spain, Philip IV, to decorate one of his palaces in Madrid, the Buen Retiro, not far from the Prado itself. A series of giant canvases that celebrate and commemorate great military victories in recent Spanish history. So that's what's going on in the painting, and on the left-hand side are the ones who are surrendering, are the Dutch, who are rather plainly dressed. As you can see, their spears and so forth are rather short in comparison to the very, very, very long pole lances that are held by the Spanish on the right, all of which are pointing upward, a visual clue, a symbol or a signal from the artist to us of who is victorious, what's going on in the painting itself. So what we see is the surrender of the keys of the city of Breda by Eustace of Orange, a member of the Dutch royal family, to the Spanish commander, who was in fact the great Genoese general Ambrogio Spinola, commander of the Spanish armies of the Netherlands, at least at this time. There are many things about the composition of Struth's photograph that are very intriguing to me, one of which is the way that he has positioned himself at an angle. In other words, it's not a straight-on photograph of the painting on the wall with the children in front. Instead, he's adopted an oblique angle, positioning himself to the right of the composition, which means that we then get a diagonal that leads in space from the lower right towards the upper left of the actual gallery, the actual space of the room in which these children are assembled. And also, we aren't looking straight on at the painting, but instead are looking at it obliquely. That adoption, that choice of position, is very crucial, really, for the way that the entire composition works and how it works between the painting on the wall and the children in the foreground. And that's because of the way that Velásquez started out organizing the space. If you look at the painting, you can see that light itself leads the eye from the lower right to the upper left, or at least the diagonal stretches in that direction, just as Struth has positioned himself so that the composition of the photograph does exactly the same thing. In each case, whether we're talking about the assemblage of standing male figures in the painting or all of the children who are seated in the gallery, the composition is very deceptive, because at first glance one might think that these bodies are all arranged in a line. That's suggested to us by this sort of isocephalic ordering of the heads. You know, they all look like they're in a straight line, as is true with respect to the group of children. But of course, they are in a very complex, multiple figure composition, both in that painting as well as in the photograph. Imagine if you were a bird flying overhead and looking down. These people would not be standing in a straight line, nor would these children be sitting in any kind of a straight line, but instead it would be some sort of a complex geometric pattern, some kind of a parallelogram, or perhaps an X or Z shape. So we can't look at just the painting or just the photograph to know the arrangement of the figures. We have to look at where the feet are and the different levels on which people stand, and the way that light and shadow helps us perceive and appreciate the physical relationships. The same is true with the photograph. You see that Struth has got down fairly low, and he's used that wainscot, that entire marble wainscot in the back, as a kind of barrier. It's almost like a fence that separates the children from the wall. So in these very subtle but very particular ways, he creates a psychological interest, not so much tension, I would call it, as much as a complexity that takes time to understand and to perceive. We, of course, are in his shoes as he looks at this scene, addressed both by the artist in the painting and again by the little boy who looks out at us with a mixture of sort of wonder and maybe a bit of ennui. He's probably had enough and would rather get up now and go on and see the next painting that's on the teacher's agenda. This is a beautiful photograph, and one which certainly leads us to think about and to remember how children are so vulnerable, but also so susceptible and receptive of education and of learning. Interesting to see their various reactions, even of these two girls, because while they're not listening a bit to their own teacher, they're clearly fascinated by something that's going on outside the frame of Struth's photograph. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it's one of the great objects that Struth has made in this entire series of museum photographs. Beautifully printed, great in scale, memorable, and something that I think probably engages every visitor, every viewer who sees this comes away with something different.